Thank you for joining us for Talk with Toni. Our subject is transportation, and I'm very grateful to have with us Senator Bill Cunningham and Representative Marcus Evans, who are respectively the chairs of the transportation committees in their body. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourself. We'll start with Senator Cunningham. If you could tell us not only what district you represent and what part of the county that's in, but a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thanks, President Preckwinkle. So I represent the 18th district. I have a city-suburban split district. About 40% of my district is on the southwest side of the city, takes up parts of the 18th, 21st, and 19th wards. And then my district in the suburbs covers several communities in Worth Township, Palos Township, and Orland Township. I've been a state senator now for almost 8 years. I was sworn in January of 2018, and before that, for 2 years, I served with Representative Evans briefly in the State House. And before I was a member of the General Assembly, I worked for the Cook County Sheriff's Office for 20 years.
Okay, so you're a county employee.
Yes, that's right.
There we go. Thank you for your service.
Yes. And, my district is sort of, I think, really apropos for the issues we're talking about because people in my district use different ways to get downtown, being a city-suburban split district. And we see all the time examples of the lack of equity in the way we fund transportation in Cook County and what users of public transportation in Cook County have to pay. And I see examples of that all the time, so it's something that I'm interested in tackling in Springfield. All
right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Help us out, Representative Evans.
Again, thank you, Madam President, for this great opportunity to speak about transportation. My district is southeast side of Chicago. So if you think about the city, you got Stony Island, you got Interstate 94, you got Torrance Avenue, so major hubs of movement of traffic. You got the railroads, of course, you have the electric line. I cover a part of Thornton Township, the villages of Burnham, you got the city of Calumet City, down to the village of Lansing, the village of Linwood, and Sauk Village, right at the Will Cook line. So right at the end of the county, all the way up into the southeast side of Chicago. And again, you talk about traffic, that is the enemy of kind of enjoying life. And that is a problem in our community. Getting all those folks from the south suburb, from the south side to the city and just moving around for enjoyment is a big issue. And that's why transportation is something that, that you think about. How do we move people around in the best possible way? Today, that's not the reality. But working with you and my colleagues, we're looking to make the future better.
I appreciate that. Now, Senator Cunningham was good enough to tell us that he spent 20 years in the county in the sheriff's office before he came to this position. So how did you end up in elective office?
Yeah, well, again, we came around the same time. I was appointed in April of 2012. Prior to that, I worked for an alderman, so I was an assistant, a city service, a helper for Michelle Harris.
Constituent service.
Constituent services, in the 8th Ward, where I still live today. And so I came up, working hard and dealing with folks, and I got a great opportunity to be appointed in 2012. So been in the State House for 8 years, and I'm just continuing to move up and work on great policy issues with you and other leaders in the city.
All right, I'm grateful for that. Now, in the General Assembly, we pushed for what we called our Fair Transit Pilot Project, and both of you were good enough to be sponsors and to help us. We'll start with you, Senator. We're very grateful for your help and support. How do you look at transportation and equity? How do they work together?
Well, I think it's really important. And first, I want to thank you, President Preckwinkle, for getting involved in this issue. I, as I mentioned, worked for 20 years in county government and have followed politics and government in Chicago and Cook County my entire life. And county board presidents did not traditionally get involved in this issue, and I think that was a real mistake. We can't have the proper levels of economic development and economic equity in our county if the county board president isn't engaged. So I think that's really been a game changer. So the way I look at it is, access to transportation is access to jobs. We have to make it easy and affordable for our constituents to get downtown, which is the hub of jobs in Chicago. We also need to make it equally easy to get from suburb to suburb destinations too. And we just do a terrible job of that right now, I think, in the Chicago metropolitan area. I always give this example to illustrate it. You can live on the north end of my district. Say you're a single mother living in an apartment above a store at 90th and Ashland. If you want to take a half hour or 40-minute train ride downtown, You can walk to the 91st Street Metro Station or the Brainerd Station on the Metro Rock Island line and pay $5.50 to get downtown. Now, conversely, let's say you're a businessman that lives in Wilmette, and you live in a $1 million home on Sheridan Road, and you want to get downtown for work. You can walk a couple blocks to the Linden CTA station and take a train downtown for $2.50. So $5.50 versus $2.50. And, you know, there's just a different name on the side of the train.
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to the same place, but...
And you're taking public transit.
Yes, and the people from the most affluent parts of our community are paying less than half as people in some of the poorer parts of our county. So that is just wrong on so many different levels, and it is really self-defeating when it comes to talking about economic development. If people can't get to jobs, you're never going to have economic development. So, you know, when we talk, you know, you're a history teacher and you look back at some of the real problems we have in equity, with equity in the Chicago area. There's a lot of reasons for it, but transportation is one of them. And we're really making a mistake if we don't pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Representative?
Yeah, and just adding on, you know, you look at my district, if you're in Sauk Village or Linwood, where do you go? You know, you have to, if you miss a bus, it's a 30-minute wait, maybe more. You know, there's no trains in close proximity. If you're low income and you can't afford your vehicle, I mean, you're putting people really in a box where they don't get the opportunity to just, you know, go to a family member's house, enjoy downtown. You know, suburb to suburb connection. That's something I'm glad you brought it up. You know, if I want to enjoy a restaurant in another part of the county, it's very difficult to get there other than being on the train. So I think there's all these missed opportunities. And I thank you for your leadership because you're looking to tackle a very difficult issue. You know, a lot of leaders go after the few that's on the ground, but I love your leadership because you're going after something difficult. How do we solve this public transportation issue? And everybody said, well, it's too difficult and we just kind of deal with what we have. But let's be imaginative, not just transformative. Let's think about what doesn't exist. And I thank you for that because we got to get people on public transit and just get them more comfortable to using it. You know, you go to Washington, D.C., you go to Boston, you go to New York City, you got stockbrokers and you got, you know, minimum wage workers all using public transit. And that's become the issue here that we don't want to discuss in the Chicagoland area. It has become a place where more affluent folks choose not to utilize in certain communities, particularly minority communities, or there's just not, you know, reasonable access to it for enjoyment. I want to go to the movies. You know, why am I driving? You know, if I want to just, you know, maybe even go to the grocery store, why am I driving? You know, we got to get folks using public transit too and make it a fun, equitable place. And you're doing that. And I think it's going to be a tough road, and our legislation is a part of that, and you laying that foundation. Thank you. But I want to continue to push this. It's a mission, you know, personally for me, growing up poor, you know, and seeing that, you know, a bus card really was difficult for some folks. And I think, you know, people forget that, and you understand that.
Well, thank you. Just for our viewers, the Fair Transit Plan means reduced fares on the Metro Electric line, which serves your constituents, right? Southeast suburbs, kind of down that way. And the Rock Island line serves your community, south side, and it's kind of a little bit southwest in the suburbs. And both lines would be the beneficiaries of fare reductions.
Yes.
In the city, it would be to $2.50, which is, as you point out, the CTA fare.
Right.
And then in the suburbs, the fares would be reduced.
Yeah.
So that's a big.
So it will directly address the inequity, the example I gave.
Yeah.
That hypothetical woman that lives at 90th and Ashland will pay the same price
Right.
as the person getting on the train in Wilmette.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I want to ask both of you because you're steeped in the transportation issue. We're in a real challenging time for public transit because of the pandemic. How can all of us in government work to ensure that, first of all, we retain the systems that we've got, and secondly, that they work together better?
Well, we've had big problems before the pandemic, and the pandemic has only
Exacerbated
made them worse.
them,
And
right.
that's true across so many different sectors. I mean, the most immediate thing we need is an infusion of cash from the federal government as transportation systems all through the country need. Yeah. But then there are other things that we really need to address, and some of it is parts of archaic laws that are in Springfield that were mostly written in the 70s and 80s when they were turf battles that were partisan, that were regional between the city and suburbs. And, we set up 3 different transportation service boards. And a lot of those decisions were made to sort of split up the pie politically. And so there was a balance of power between the suburbs and the city. They weren't based on what they should be based on, is how do we get people from point A to point B as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible. So I think we need to really look at this system of systems we have right now. People don't care if it says CTA or Metra or PACE on the side of the bus or train that they get on. They just want to be able to pay an affordable price and get there quickly. And our system really isn't designed for that. It's designed to solve political turf battles that existed in the 70s and 80s.
No question.
It's often been said to me that if you were setting up a public transportation system from scratch, you'd never do it the way we're doing it.
No.
As you say, with 3 separate entities providing service for the region. And, everybody, as you say, people don't care what's on the side of the bus or the train. They just want to get where they're going as quickly and as cheaply
Right.
as they can.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. What about you, Representative Evans? Do you want to add anything to?
Yeah, and I think the senator hit it on the head that, but you are laying the foundation to change that. And then new thought is very different. That's what makes your leadership so phenomenal, is that you're saying, yes, we've been doing this in this dysfunctional way for a long time. Let's stop doing it. Let's just move people around. Let's make it a transformational, imaginative system. Let's say this system is going to move people rather than PACE is going to compete with CTA and celebrate that they had a more profit. It's not about that, because it's a public transportation system. And I think that is a thought change, and it's going to take leaders like you to push for that, because we're discussing that. It doesn't matter. Let's just move people. Other regions, I think, are seeing it that way. We just want to move people. When you're in D.C., we're in a MARC train, and you're on their other train, you're using the same car. There's a lot of easy transferability, marketing together. I think other regions are changing, and let's now in Chicago do it. And again, you're laying the foundation for that. So thank you.
All right, one of the things I think the state legislature mandated was the universal fare card, but it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So you can't move easily, as you point out, from Metra to PACE or from CTA to Metra or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so we've got 3 different systems, and they all have separate fares, and
Yeah,
that's
you
right.
can't move quickly and easily between those systems. So is that a challenge we can address in Springfield?
I think so, but again, it takes us having these conversations to change the thought. Even with some of our colleagues, they believe that it's competing. Hey, I represent PACE, so I have to
That's
stand
right.
up for PACE, or I'm all in the city, so I got to stand up for CTA, or maybe whether it's the mayor, the governor. People feel it's a parochial thing with these systems. But again, as we have these discussions to say it's all our system, it's one system. Doesn't matter who makes more. Let's talk about sharing revenue. Let's talk about making it one vision and goal. And once you do that, I think it'll be easy. And we're, I guess, a part of laying that. We're digging that ditch of thought change. And you've been a
Oh, I
part of a lot of
appreciate
thought
that.
change. It's very difficult.
And there's some, I hesitate to say low-hanging fruit, because it makes it sound easier than it is. But we have some things in the statutes now, like, for instance, we have a requirement that 50% of the money that operating revenue that a system has to come from the fare box.
Yeah.
That's really helped expand these inequities. When I was a kid, I could take the CTA downtown, or I could take Metro. It was $1.25 to take the CTA, because you'd have to get a transfer, and it was $1.95 to take the Metro. A gap. There's always been that gap, but now that gap
Is
is
widened.
even wider, and it has a lot to do with that fare
Fare
box
box requirement.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things like that is we can maybe address. I guess I would rather we go bigger and address really the problems with the structures we have right now.
Right. I mean, having a universal fare card between the 3 systems is an incremental change, but the broader question is, why do we have 3 systems?
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a
And people come here from out of town, and that are used to getting around Washington D.C. or the Bay Area, where you have multiple towns, and there's one card.
a BART card, yeah.
Yeah,
that's
and
all.
they come here. and they're like,
Bay Area Rapid Transit. I'm
That's
sorry.
right. That's right. So, and we don't have that here, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And like I said, it's because of archaic political battles.
For sure.
Well, listen, we're very grateful
Thank you.
that Senator Cunningham and Representative Evans were able to join us today. And we're grateful for your advocacy for Cook County and Springfield. Thank you on behalf of all of our constituents.
Thank you
Thank
for your
you.
leadership. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for rejoining us for Talk with Toni. In this segment, my guests are John Yonan, who's Acting Bureau Chief of Asset Management and former Superintendent of our Department of Transportation and Highways, and Sis Killen, who's Assistant Superintendent of Transportation and Highways. There we go, I got it right. We're going to start with you, John, if you'd
Yes.
sort of introduce yourself and tell us who you are and how you got here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, John Yonan, the Acting Bureau Chief of Asset Management, recently vacated the, opportunity that you gave me back in 2012 to come over from the city to become Superintendent of Transportation and Highways. And in that time period, I was able to bring along Sis Killen, who's going to be, kind of transitioning into that role, and very excited about this opportunity to serve you in this new capacity. And we've got some great transportation stories to share later on.
All right, so you introduced yourself a little bit. For many years, you were at the Department of Transportation. We worked together when I was alderman.
Yes, we did.
Okay, all right, good. And was that how you started out in the engineering field, or what?
It was, yes. So I, lifelong Chicagoan, and went down to Carbondale for college in engineering, and then came back home, and that was my first job, was working with the Chicago Department of Transportation, and did that for 19 years before coming here.
Okay, all right. A similar stint. I was an alderman for 19 years.
Exactly,
Before I got this job.
yes.
All right, Sis, tell us a little about yourself.
All right, so I graduated from University of Illinois with a bachelor's in civil engineering. I started my career in private consulting, actually doing quite a bit of work for the city of Chicago, so many of the improvements within your ward.
Okay.
And just 8 years ago, I actually came over and began public service. So I have been in the
So
department.
John recruited you?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Now serve as the Assistant Superintendent of Transportation for the last 6 years, and building a great foundation to build off of for equitable transportation in the county.
Okay, so women are still underrepresented in engineering.
They are. When I was in school, they had about 4 females in a class of about 200. I recently gave a presentation to one of the professional practicums, and they said the numbers are now up to 20%, which was very good. We still have a lot of work to do.
So it's 2% to 20%.
So there's been a large increase, but to encourage diversity in the field is still extremely important. We do see the number of women and minorities increasing, but still not where we want them to be.
Okay, yeah, I know it's a field where inclusion has been a historic challenge. How's that?
Well said.
Okay, all right. John, we just announced some investments in transportation. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the program and what we're doing?
Sure, absolutely. So, again, being, very prophetic, when you first asked the question, how many highways was the Department of Highways responsible? And the answer was 0. Day one, you asked me to look at ways that the transportation or the highway department can be kind of turned into a multi-modal transportation type department. And so when we, in 2013, launched the beginning of our long-range transportation plan, again, the thoughts, the guidance, the direction that you gave us was go out, talk to experts, bring some people to the table, not just the ones in this industry, folks that, were in charge of business. And we came up with that plan in 2016 that set out policy priorities. And again, over and over again, I've said this, that there aren't enough people today that could have, imagined how setting a long-range transportation plan to not focus on projects, but instead on policy priorities, really, years later was prophetic as to how transportation investments and the way to do transportation to serve all constituents' needs should be done. And so one of those initiatives is our Invest in Cook program. Cook County, 5.2 million residents, is only responsible for about 5% of the roadway assets. And there would be no way to be able to make any kind of real strategic and regional decisions and be able to have significance and relevance with just that small amount of responsibility. And so our long-range plan allowed us to come up with this Invest in Cook program, which was an initiative of the long-range transportation plan, to take some funds during a time where we were financially challenged, but you made the commitment to make sure that the money that we had, $8.5 million, went to serve the communities in Cook County. And so that Invest in Cook program that was launched in 2017 is what I want to kind of share a little bit of, one particular project which is very exciting. It's very kind of cutting edge to where we are in the transportation industry. And that was our inaugural 2017 investment in Bedford Park. Bedford Park is a big, kind of a job-creating municipality that has industry basically right near transit, but you hear how the last mile connection is usually what causes some folks to decide to drive instead of use transit. Bedford Park is served by Metra, Pace, CTA,
Just a second,
bus, and rail.
so people understand, the last mile means you get off the bus, you get off the train, whatever, and then it's still a mile to where you need to go.
That is
And so the
correct.
question is, how are you going to get that last
How
mile?
are you going to get there? There
Okay.
is none of that transit available. And so in Bedford Park, this challenge, and back in 2017, they teamed up with Cook County, put an application in for us to try to figure out how we can now encourage transit to be the choice that the campus on Bedford Park that serves a number of industries would be the number one choice of those workers. And so they piloted, took our money and collaborated with us on how to be able to start some surveys, multi-language surveys in some of these jobs and industries, and said that the biggest challenge was, again, we need to have something that's easy to be able to predict that I'm on the first shift, second shift, third shift, that we would have certain types of vehicles available to bring us from the various transit stations. And so they teamed up with some rideshare companies. They put an RFP on the street to find out how to most cost effectively do that. And in the coming weeks here, you're going to be invited to their inaugural kickoff, which they will roll out their plan that they have to be able to, again, make transit the option for these workers to be able to get to their jobs because of this last mile solution that we believe is going to be a model for other municipalities in Cook County. And this is the first time it's being rolled out in this region. And again, this is the type of things that our Invest in Cook program was looking to incubate, because in Bedford Park, that was the biggest challenge that they had. So that is one example, but again, in 2020, our Invest in Cook program did still award 30 projects, took the $8.5 million and leveraged another $26 million in various projects.
Just a second,
And,
so the leverage is money, that means the money comes from the state or from the federal government, and we provide kind of a local match to help make that
local
happen.
match. Yeah, thank you for that clarity. And so one of the policy priorities is making strategic investments. And when we have that opportunity to put in a grant for a community or partner with another agency to provide a local match, that is the term leverage, to try to bring as much additional dollars to the table, as you said, federal, state, and local funds. And so that's where that $8.5 million is going to allow us to be able to realize these 30 projects in 2020.
All right, so sometimes a local unit of government, a city, town, or village wants to apply for a state grant or a federal grant, but they need a local match and they don't have it. So
Right.
we can provide that money, and that will enable them to get the additional federal and state resources to make the project move forward.
Absolutely. And then also, unfortunately, projects go through the various phases. Grants are very heavy loaded to the construction phase of a project. So there's that planning, the design, and then construction. And so it's difficult for these municipalities to be able to apply for grants because they don't have the earlier phases of a project.
The design.
And the design of the
And
planning and
planning
the
work.
design,
Yeah.
yes. And so we're enabling that with this Invest in Cook program.
Okay, all right. So it's a focus on multimodal projects.
Yes.
In the past, our Department of Transportation, it wasn't, I'm sorry, Department of Highways, right? It wasn't
Yes, sir.
transportation. Focused mainly on roads and bridges, and now we have a sort of broader view of what we need to be up to.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, one of the things we're up to is a fair transit model. Why don't you tell us about that, Sis?
So fair transit, very exciting. When we think about our long-range transportation plan connecting Cook County, the number one policy priority was to focus on transit and other transportation alternatives. Fair transit does just that. We're looking at how transit can be accessible, not just physical accessibility, but is it available? Is it available at a cost that residents can afford? We looked across the county and looked at how much was being spent by Cook County residents on their transportation, and we found that in particular, those residents in South Cook were paying more of a greater percentage of their household income than anyone else in other areas of the county. We also found through our South Cook mobility study that they have the longest commutes to job centers. And what Fair Transit does is that it focuses on the Metro Electric and Rock Island District lines to afford residents a discounted fare to make transit options that may be closer to them, more reliable, more efficient, now available to them. We want to make sure that those connections to job centers exist, and we know that with the launch of Fair Transit, we're looking more holistically at the transportation services, specifically the transit services that exist within Cook County. Given that Cook County does not own or operate any of these services, we formed a tremendous partnership with both Metra and PACE as part of the launch of Fair Transit that will be rolling out, you will be rolling out in January of this year. And there's a lot of tools in the toolbox on this one. We want to make sure that we're reaching residents to make sure they know what is being made available for them, to encourage them, bring people back to transit. We know the impact of COVID-19 has kept folks away from transit. But what we do see is that many of the essential workers are still on transit, and we need to give back and serve them the way they have served us throughout this entire pandemic.
Well, Fair Transit is part of our broader effort to look at these issues through an equity lens. So how does equity and transportation come together aside from our Fair Transit initiative?
Well, as we were looking beyond Fair Transit, looking at the South Cook Mobility Study, we saw where the inequities existed. We looked again at that percentage of the household income spent on it. We realized that connections simply weren't available. And if connections aren't available, neither are the job opportunities. So we're focusing our investments in the transit space and then also with infrastructure. How can we build for businesses to come into communities? We don't have to provide connections to still travel 20 miles to a job. How can we build up communities and make those investments equitably in areas that had been historically disinvested, so that we're bringing the jobs into communities to create that kind of vibrant growth within the community itself.
Very good, very good. John, do you want to speak to the equity issue as well?
So earlier when we had talked about the Invest in Cook, allowing Cook County to fund the planning and design phase, we realized that the challenges that we found in South Cook was that there still was a lack sometimes of leadership when a project got to construction. And when they applied for certain grants, even if the match was there, was it the most strategic project that should have been undertaken? And unfortunately, again, when you look at transportation funding, it really does break down to municipal boundaries. And we know in transportation, vehicles are not, driving across the road that understand jurisdictional boundaries. But you'll know it, you'll see it. You'll drive around one certain town on a road, and all of a sudden the condition of the road changes. That's because that's how funding is set up. And so we believe that this opportunity that was given to us in the capital bill allowed us to focus on ways that investments in the Southland, investments where match was a challenge, was something that we looked close and hard, and now we are partnering with a few of these municipalities and the grant opportunities and allowing those projects to, again, be holistic as opposed to just being very short focused on what maybe a municipal boundary or what a local need might be. We're looking at a regional goal.
All right. So we're trying to have a regional focus, particularly in the Southland, where we know there's some challenges around resources.
Absolutely.
So the capital bill, would you explain to folks what that is? I'm not sure everybody knows.
Absolutely. So for 3 decades, we've been at this my entire career, that we kept saying that the need for our infrastructure that's deteriorating was to find some kind of reliable revenue source. And it had been a challenge for a lot of politicians that did not want to raise this revenue. Again, the term taxes, no, it's revenue, and in the transportation industry, we always said that there is that user fee. It's demonstrated in our region as the Illinois Tollway, that you use it, you drive certain miles, and you pay a toll. And the ability to kind of look at the way revenue is collected to help fund our roadway system, whether it's our vehicle stickers or local registrations, it was not enough. And so for, again, over 30 years, we've been advocating for sustainable revenue. Madam President, you have in the second largest county in Illinois, really brought a voice to Springfield, brought a voice to Washington, that we really do want to make strategic investments that are going to go beyond what our assets are in Cook County, because it's the right thing to do. And that voice in Springfield really allowed us to be able to advocate for the largest share of the local funds that were given to any local agency out of the capital bill. And that capital bill was a $45 billion bill over 5 years. and it doubled the gas tax.
This is a state investment.
It's the state's investments. The legislature voted to double the current state motor fuel tax from 19 cents to 38 cents. And then they also wanted to accelerate some construction and sold $1.5 billion in bonds that were also distributed to the local agencies. And so that basically kind of calculates into about a 66% increase to funding for Cook County. And those kind of dollars are kind of coming to us in the first 3 years of the capital bill with a larger distribution of funds so that we can help accelerate some projects. But the challenge is a lot of these local municipalities don't have projects ready to go. And again, this is where your foresight in that invest in Cook, those investments to get some projects moving
To do
are
the planning and
positioning.
design work, so that
Correct.
they can get the project to the point where they
Is
can
the
get
construction
funding.
dollars,
Right.
and those projects are going to be realized in the next few years. So that capital bill really was a big, deal for Cook County, and again, thank you for your leadership on that.
Well, thank you, John, our Acting Bureau Chief of Asset Management and former Superintendent of Transportation and Highways, and Sis Killen, the Assistant Superintendent, for joining us this afternoon and sharing information about what's going on in transportation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for Talk with Tony.
Thank you.